We're recording. Hey, Papa. I just need you to tell me your name and the year you were born, and where you were born.
I'm Jean-Louis Jnicknair, the last of the Jnicknair clan, Fred and Cecile. I was born on December 21st, 1936, in Eagle Lake, on a wintry day.
You better believe it.
Kids were sent off to the lake.
To the lake, yes.
They were sent off to the lake to skate and clean a skating rink while Mom was giving birth at home.
Yeah. That's an old folk song.
Yeah, and I heard there was some story attached to that. What story was told to them while you were being born? Were you?
Oh no, Leopold would be the one to remember. Well, he was 4 years old, so I don't really remember. Jack, you maybe remember. Lenia, were you there?
I was on the lake.
You were on the lake. Okay.
And I came back and I had a little brother.
Right. Deliveries were done at home a lot in those days. I believe Dr. Kirk might have been the one to have been at the house. Things were done at the home as much as possible to save some money, I gather. And eventually, our mother became a midwife and delivered most of the babies on our street, on 3rd Street in Eagle Lake. She had her package, she had her sheets, she had her scissors, she had whatever was necessary. People did not wear rubber gloves in those days. Everything was done quite naturally.
Did you actually go to any of these when you were a kid?
No.
Yeah.
So that was taboo for us.
Oh.
So
that was a woman's thing?
That was a woman thing.
So, Papa, what was your first memories of your father and your mom?
Oh my. Probably at two extremes of the season. Christmas time was a big time for us. Mom and Dad made superb efforts to give us things that we didn't have during the year. Candy was not something we saw at the house a lot during the year, but at Christmas time there seems to have been plenty. Decorations like people do at Christmas time. The Christmas tree, we went out and cut our own. We'd go out 2, 3, 4 kids. Originally, of course, with Dad, but then when we get to be older enough, we'd go out and cut our own tree, either across the lake, off on the farm, and never had to ask anybody. We'd go out and select our own tree and drag it home, decorate it. I do not remember any decorations in the windows or outside the house. It was primarily the Christmas tree. The house was always superbly cleaned, and it was very festive, and of course a lot of food. There were some of Dad's relatives that lived in Winterville, and so holidays, Sundays, but holidays in particular, they were always invited to the house. We shared uncles, aunts, cousins, and for people without great financial resources, there seems to have been plenty of food. Food was a big thing for our entertainment. And gifts were, if we received 1 or 2 gifts, we thought we were in heaven. It was not like what we see in families today with kids receiving all kinds of things.
Imelda used to make fudge.
Oh, yes, fudge. We made a lot of our homemade foods. Dad, who had cooked in the First World War for officers in France and in lumber camps when he was a child. Dad never finished 4th grade, so cooking was a big thing for him, as well as manual labor. So he cooked donuts, and we made fudge. Mom made divinity fudge, white fudge with nuts. We made a lot of our own candies. Taffy, boiled a lot of maple goods. Made our own root beer. This was the sodas that we have. We didn't buy too many things. And when we did, when I say we, Mom and Dad bought in quantity. I remember them buying flour by the 100 pounds, and they would bill that. That would take them all winter to pay. 100 pounds of beans, 100 pounds of sugar. And molasses, we would go, there was a store, a Michaud store downtown, that they sold molasses out of a barrel. And we would bring our own gallon jug, and we'd buy molasses that way. Had a big, huge garden that everybody worked in. Never considered child labor. We were expected to do it, and we did it. And since we had over 100 chickens and 2 cows and 2 pigs and sometimes 1 or 2 sheep, which were slaughtered for meat, the whole family was involved in taking care of animals, of course including cats and dogs. But the chickens laid eggs through the summer and through the winter, and those that stopped laying eggs, Mom had a way of finding out which chickens did not lay. Those chickens fed us throughout the year. There was always a roast chicken on Sunday. That was the main staple.
Now tell me about how your mom handled those chickens getting them to the table. You said she did something kind of special.
My dad would take the chickens by the legs and lay it on a block of wood, and he'd chop the head off and then throw it in the wood, either in the woodshed or in a wood box that we kept in the shed, until that chicken just died. Mom did it differently. She'd grab the chicken by the head and twist it. I remember that explicitly. She'd couple twists and that chicken's neck was broken, and somehow it would bleed. I'm not sure exactly. They had to bleed. And those chickens were left to die. And on weekends and stuff, it was only 1 or 2 chickens at a time. But in the late fall, there was always a large project, late fall, sometimes early winter, of killing several chickens. This is an interesting experience. I was in first grade when I started having pains in my side, and I ended up having a burst appendix. Our school was only probably 100 yards away from the house, and the rest of the family thought that I was really dog-legging it, that I was not interested in cleaning chickens, and they probably had 10, 12 chickens that night, that afternoon, that night, that had been killed after Mom's school. Mom taught grammar school right next door. And so Mom said they had to call the doctor, and to make sure that I was sick, she made my favorite meal, spaghetti, and I wouldn't eat very much. So I had serious pains in my side, and Dr. Kirk or Dr. Hans at that time came to the house and checked me out and said, "This kid's got to go to the hospital." The hospital was about a mile away from home, small hospital, probably 20, 30 beds. And there was no way to get me to the hospital, so the doctor took me in his car. In those days, doctors were quite helpful. Took me to the hospital, and I was operated on, and I had a burst appendix. And I ended up staying in the hospital over 1 month. So this must have been late November, because I spent my birthday in the hospital, recuperating, getting my burst appendix cleaned out. And also payment, again, you're thinking of a laborer. My dad was a laborer on the railroad, and obviously lucky to have a job, but not making a lot of money. And Mom had started teaching again at that point. She had taught until the family came through. We were 12 children, 3 of which died. The oldest one died. And at this point, since I had started going to school at 6 years old, Mom had also started teaching. And between the two of them, we're making enough to keep the family going. And but bills at the doctors were paid by eggs, milk, cream, I presume meat products when we killed animals, chickens, lamb. We slaughtered 1 or 2 lambs a year.
Okay, Bob, can you hold on for a second? I'm having a look. I'm going to roll right now. You just tell me about the story about how you got your appendix. And then I want to hear about the bargaining thing as well.
I was 6 years old in first grade and started having pains in my stomach in first grade, which was a school right next door to us. Kids have pains, kids complain about things, and teacher kept me in school. Finally got out of school that afternoon and walked to the house and was having serious pains, and Mom thought that they should call the doctor. It was the time of year when they were slaughtering a number of chickens at the house to be stored in large 2-quart jars with a large mouth on it. This meant killing the chickens the way I described earlier, either mom and dad. But there were several, and the whole family was going to participate in cleaning these chickens. Mom would soak them in a bucket of boiling water and bring them to the table. Here's 5, 6, 7 children around a table, each cleaning their own chicken. Not a very interesting smell. And everybody thought that I was dog-legging it, thinking that I didn't feel like cleaning chickens and helping the rest of the family. Even if I was 6 years old, everybody participated. So she called the doctor, came home, felt me, and had serious pains, and determined not only that I have appendix, but I had a burst appendix. So it was serious, and the only way to get me to the hospital was to have the doctor take me in his car. Took me to the hospital about a mile away and operated overnight, I presume. And since it was burst, and there was a lot of cleaning of the innards, I ended up staying in the hospital over a month through my birthday, through my 7th birthday. I remember that quite clearly. And we had a small dog at the time, Tippy, who supposedly was looking for me. And we eventually lost that dog because we couldn't find him.
Was it because he was looking for you?
He was probably looking for me, which was a pretty sad thing, because when I got home for my birthday, after my birthday, probably around the 22nd or 23rd of December, I got home just for Christmas. Laid on the sofa by the Christmas tree, I remember that. Spent the Christmas at home. And again, you were asking some of the things that I vividly remember. I remember the Christmases. I remember the summers. I remember the summers a great deal, because we, throughout the year, not just summers, but we would walk to church, which was a little over a mile from the house. And we'd walk as a family, all dressed up. Baths were taken in. We didn't have running water until I was 10 years old, being the last of the family. But I remember bathing in the kitchen near a wood stove so that we'd be warm in just a hot water bowl. So they were, washcloth baths. That's what we took. The summers were spent pretty much on Sundays with the Frank Jnicknair family, and Aunt Eva and Imelda joining us after church, where Dad would make homemade donuts. Now, I don't know that he made them every Sunday, but it's one thing that I remember that he made often. And so, we were only allowed to eat the donut holes until he had his whole batch of donuts made. And then we'd all sit around and chat. And usually after the Frank Jnicknair family would leave, we'd pack up. We had a 20-foot Old Town canoe, canvas canoe. And the lake was walking distance. And Mom and Dad would pack a lunch. And the whole clan would walk to the lake, jump in this canoe.
11 people.
Yes, a large canoe, no life jackets, a 5 or 7 horsepower motor, and we would go 2-3 miles across the lake. One of the places which was very popular was Camp Cozy, a point on the lake, on Eagle Lake, with a sandy beach, and we'd spend the day there. And that was the big day for hot dogs. Everybody was allowed to eat as many hot dogs as they wanted. I think there was competition sometimes between the older boys as to how many hot dogs they could eat. But it was a fine day, and it's something we remember as doing as family. Again, I don't know that it happened every Sunday, but I get the impression sometimes, if it was nice weather, that's what we did. We did our own entertainment. Like I said, we would make our own popcorn, we would make our own fudge, we'd make our own butter, of course. Butter was made just about every Saturday. Bread was made every Saturday. Home-baked beans were soaked on Friday night all night and cooked on a wooden stove with lard. There were always heavy meals, but that was Saturday. Mom would having the usual regular bread weekly. To us it was a treat to either have cornbread with our beans on Saturday or have sticky buns, cinnamon rolls. That was really special. Education was something that Mom valued a great deal. I don't think anybody in our family have felt pressured, but we accepted the fact that Mom believed that education was very important. Dad had never finished 4th grade, and Mom had been an interpreter in Washington, D.C. for maybe a year and a half, maybe at the most 2 years.
What was she interpreter for in Washington?
French and English for diplomats.
Was this during World War I?
During World War One.
World War One. No, it was World War Two.
World War
Two.
Two. World
Yeah, it's-
early 40s. Yeah, World
born in
War.
36.
Well, she'd been an interpreter before I was born,
Yes.
and I was born in 36.
She had Anna the Bell. That was yeah. That
Maybe it was between the wars.
probably.
Yeah. Again, some of the priorities I think in our family that we have learned. Certainly, one was work ethic. It was important that everybody worked and did something creative. Church was center of our life. Mom participated a great deal at church, sometimes known as the assistant pastor in our town. She helped a great deal with our church. Father Thebo was in our parish many years. He's the only priest that I remember, but there were a few other priests that were there when the family started. And there were bazaars for raising money. Mom always participated. She was a member and a leader of the Ladies of Santa Ann for many years. And I think all the boys in that family became altar boys. Altar boys was a big thing in our town. Most of the families were Catholic. There were always 10, 15 altar boys. And it was always a question of when we'd be old enough to actually serve Mass. That was a real promotion for us. So church was a large center of our values in our family, and education became extremely important. And at my age, I will not speak for the others as to when they started going away for school, but my mother valued education enough that she was a good lady to convince people without making people feel that they were obliged. I started going to school away from the town of Eagle Lake for the 7th and 8th grade because she truly believed that going to a private school was more important for us and had greater value. And so not only did they make the sacrifices financially, we made the sacrifices being away from family. And so I went to 2 years of private grammar school in St. Agatha, about 35 miles away from home, again with no car. If there was, at any time that we came home with somebody else who was driving their kids home. So we went to a private school and stayed there. After graduation from 8th grade.
No, I was going to have you tell me the time you had to thumb your ride back all the way from the bottom of Maine up. You want to tell me that
All
story?
right, well, we, a lot of members of our family went to private school away from the town of Eagle Lake. And so after St. Agatha, Dad having worked on the railroad for many years, we would have railroad passes that were available to us. From Eagle Lake, we'd go to Oakfield, Maine, down to Bangor, Maine, change trains. It was a long days or a long evening's ride. In my case, to Biddeford, Maine. And from Biddeford, Maine, at that point, I guess we had to take a taxi to go 2-3 miles or walk the 2-3 miles with our bags to St. Francis High School, college. And I don't know, in most of the cases that I know of, my brothers took the train, but I got a little rambunctious and would hitchhike sometimes to try to get home a little faster. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. It was not from high school, however, that I got caught in the woods of northern Maine, but when I was in college. Dressed up, shirt and tie, hitchhiking, long coat, well-dressed, boots, suitcase in hand, and trying to beat the clock because from St. Anselm's in Manchester, in order to come to Northern Maine by train, I would have to go to Boston, then to Portsmouth, to Portland, to Bangor, and up here, and it was over a 24-hour day's train ride with the stops and all. So I'd get on the road and hitchhike, and I remember coming home for Christmas, and I got caught in a town about 40 miles or so, 50 miles from here, Oxbow, and I practically spent the night there, thinking that I might freeze.
And what were you wearing?
I was wearing shirt, tie, jacket, overcoat. I mean, there was no down jackets or anything in those days, and you know, overshoes. Overshoes were the big thing for dressy people over their shoes. They're good winter clothes, but not clothes to stay out all night in the northern woods of Maine during the winter. But we survived those. Those are experiences that we remember.
Well, who finally picked you up? Or did you get picked up?
I picked up, I believe, either by a bread delivery truck or a newspaper delivery truck. Early morning, 4 or 5 in the morning. Took me to Eagle Lake on the way to Fort Kent. Yeah. But like I said, education was superbly important, and I never felt pressured. I never felt pressured to join a religious order like my brothers did. I felt I could make my own choices. I felt proud to be a member of this family, and so I worked hard for decent grades. I guess there was a lot of pride in our family. We did things because I don't know that we thought we were different, and we never thought we were better than anybody else, but we were so proud to be a member of this clan that we all worked hard to make things succeed. And to this day, I don't think any of us in our family feel competition. I don't think so. I do things because I like to do them. I'm proud of the children that I have. I'm proud of the work that I've done in teaching. 4 years of high school, 38 years in college. It's quite a legacy, and I've been happy in my work. I think I've done it well. I always thought somewhere along the way that I had a missionary spirit, but things didn't work out quite that way for me. But in my own way, I was given the opportunity to join Rotary in 1983. And through that program, which is an international program of giving service above self, non-denominational, Rotary International consists of 1.2 million members, 530 districts, and 39,000 clubs around the world. Started mostly with men. Started with Paul Harris in 1905, a gentleman from Vermont who became a lawyer in Chicago and started Rotary with 3 other people. It has grown into a multi-billion-dollar business, and I feel very proud to be a member of that organization. I have been promoted to governor at one time of a district of 59 clubs and 2,700 members, raising funds to help local communities and poor people around the world. And so now I feel when I do that work, I'm a missionary.
Great. So Papa, the next thing I want to talk to you about is your relationship with Manok Banna. And I want to hear also about its little situation with the car.
In every family, well, let me talk about our family. I've had special relationships with each of my brothers and sisters. My older brother, sitting across from me at this moment.
And your older brother is?
Father Donald Lee Neal, our brother, our oldest brother, living brother. I used to call him Nonin when I was younger, probably Thomas's or Rachel's age. And he used to help Dad with the work around the house, the cows and the gardens and stuff.
What
And
did no nin mean?
that was just my way of saying Lee Neal as a child.
The nickname.
Yeah, okay.
And the cows were in a pasture a few hundred yards behind our house that Dad would lease, and cow was milked in the morning and milked at night. Dad did most of the milking. I never did any milking. I don't know if Lee Neal ever did any milking. Dad did most of that, but we helped going to get. And so me, the little brother, my brother here who's 11 or 12 years older than I am, would take me out in the field, and he'd give me a ride on the cow to take it home for milking. Cows are not comfortable to ride on. I can tell you. Their spine is not, they're not built like horses. But Ben now and I don't know, it's a spirit of wanting to work with our hands. Dad liked to work with his hands. Dad was never a great carpenter, but he fixed everything around the house, would not hire other people. And Ben was probably the one who got into that more than anybody else. Not that the others didn't, but got into that. And kind of adopted me. There's a 10-year difference between Ben and myself. Kind of adopted me. One of the first things that I remember that he did for me, very specifically for me, and it was for a Christmas. We had homemade sleds that Dad had made out of wood. And he did a couple things. He put a couple of those sleds together to build what we call a double runner. And we could pile up 4 or 5 kids on that and slide down our hill. Roadways were not sanded in those days. In fact, I remember very early on that roads were not plowed, but they were rolled. Snow was rolled, and to pack snow and ice.
When you're saying roll, what did they use to roll them?
Horses and big, huge, heavy rollers in the back to roll the snow. But it was not long after that that they came through with plows, and the roads were plowed. But even if they were plowed, they did not sand them, because the little town of Eagle Lake made its living a great deal with lumbering. And the lumber was hauled out of the woods from the hills with horses and sleighs, double-runnered sleighs. And so they had to skid on the snow and the ice. The roads were not sanded. And so they were great for sledding. We lived on what we called 2 hills, near 2 hills, and there was the big hill and the small hill, both of which were actually fairly small. But kids in our whole street, and maybe even around town, would sled on that street. And we'd go a distance of anywhere from 1/3 to a half mile, I would think. A good distance. So that was a lot.
You know what? I'm gonna pause on this one. And camera is rolling. Okay, you were talking about your sleds.
Well, it's interesting. We just had to take a break because Dad made his living working on the railroad, and here we are at St. Floyd's Lake, and there's a train that just went by, probably 50 yards away from us. Dad, without an education, I can tell you, was a very sensitive man and generous man. Mom having had the education, Dad listened. He was a great husband and a great father. And I remember walking, again, I'm not sure where I was a while ago, but I would meet Dad pretty much 25, 50 yards, 80 yards away from home, always, when he would come home from work. Dad was a laborer on the railroad, and he would always keep candy in his pockets. Now, I can tell you some of that candy was sticky, and it had floss from his pockets a lot of times, but it was something that he liked candy, and he would have some in his pockets. At least on payday, he would have some. I'm trying to think where we were over here, Luke.
Oh, you were in.
You're meeting Daddy from the railroad.
Yeah, no, before that, before the break.
There was a. Okay, go ahead.
One of the things that a lot of the kids in town would slide down this 3rd Street in Eagle Lake, because there was not as much traffic, other than double runner sleds with horses. We would also drag ourselves, which was not very good for family economy, because we would attach ourselves to the back of these sleds and slide. The horses would pull the sleds filled with lumber, and we would hold ourselves and slide on our old shoes. In those days, you didn't have boots like we have today. They were pretty much leathered boots with leather soles and hard rubber heels. And we had a cobbler in town that fixed shoes for kids constantly. But those are some of the things in winter, yeah, because we would wear them out. Interesting story about winter. In later years, this is after most of the members of the family are gone, but Paul and I are still around. In the winter, we had made our own skis with staves from wooden barrels and somehow attached or nailed leather straps to hold them to our boots. It was just one leather strap over our boots. And we walked maybe a mile or so to one of the hills at what we'd call La Côte Tamarack. And on soft snow, I mean, we're not talking ski areas around here. We're talking wild country. And came down the hill, and I twisted my leg. Had a very, very sore knee. Paul helped me get back home. And it's a story that's told a number of times around here that he enjoys telling about our relationship. We had in those days this red hot salve that supposedly cured most anything. And he rubbed my knee, and he wanted to make sure that it got down to where the pain was, so he rubbed and he rubbed and he rubbed. And about an hour or so later, I was in pain, not from the accident, but from the real hot salve that was burning my meat and my knee. Then he put cold towels on it. It healed, obviously. I'm walking around fine today. But it's an experience that you remember. And I don't know, I have no idea how old I was. Another experience, at 10 years old, I remember, Berna and Armand, I don't believe Paul was old enough, Berna and Armand got a job in the summer, away from school, working at Limestone Air Base. Limestone Air Base became one of the largest air bases of the country. Built in northern Maine, probably 60, 70 miles away from Eagle Lake. And so they were living there, earning some money to primarily help our household get a bathroom. The bathroom consisted, of course, of a tub and a john and a sink and running water in the kitchen from the well with a motor. But the septic system was a system designed and built by my father, which seemed to have been something that a number of people in the area did. They would dig a large hole in the ground. In our case, it was under the driveway, a large hole, and since Dad worked on the railroad, would get free railroad ties made out of cedar. And after those railroad ties eventually weakened under the rails, they would replace them, and Dad would get them free. I'm not sure how he got them to the house. They're fairly heavy. They're at least 8 feet long, about 9 by 9 inches, maybe even 10 inches sometimes. And at that point, they were been soaked probably with creosote, and again, cedar lasts a long time. And he would build a square cage, I guess you'd call it, or a square receiving system out of these railroad ties. A big, huge box underground, and the cover was made out of these railroad ties. And they would last 15, 20 years, I don't know. And that was our septic system. There was no septic tank. Unfortunately, some of and again, there was no leach fields. We're talking the 1940s. And no leach fields, and whatever egress and excess came out of that went into a ditch. In the summer, you could smell it, unfortunately. Things have changed for the better.
So tell me, I haven't heard anything about Manok Karma. Do you have any stories about him?
His car.
Gotta think now. Arma, one of my brothers, did not go to college. Finished high school and took local jobs, went in the military. Spent some time in Germany. Arma had some health issues, which started, some of it were probably inherited, some of it was probably from diet. Came back from Germany and took first a job at the Eagle Lake Hospital. And of course, at that point, having come out of the military and having a full-time job and living with our parents, was able to afford a car. And so it is one of the first cars that I remember in our family, and different members of the family learned to drive cars from that.
What kind of car was it?
First car that he had was a Mercury, and I can't describe the year. It was a big old Mercury that each one of us learned to drive. And then, of course, he progressed to different cars and started going out with a fine young lady from Plaisted, a small extension of Eagle Lake towards Fort Kent, Ledit Michaud. And then she started babysitting a neighbor's kids who was a school teacher. And so now they were getting really close and eventually got married. So we got to see them a lot. And I got to drive Arma's car, and that's how I started at a very young age. Didn't get a license with his car. I think I eventually got a license with Benna's car. When Benna was ordained a priest and started, I believe, in Waterville, Maine, was his first parish, he bought this turquoise Plymouth with a black top, and that was a spiffy car. That might have been the car that I got my license with, and obviously, since I was not interested in the priesthood, at least I didn't think I was interested in girls. Well, that car would get to our house on Sundays sometimes when Benna would come on vacation, and I was allowed to drive it and take my friends out for rides. And my relationship with Benna grew when he decided that a family, at least in his mind, because of all our camping, or rather Sunday cookouts, we kept looking at camps along the sides of Eagle Lake, and he says, someday we will have a family camp. And Benna bought this property literally at the time in the wilderness of St. Floyd Lake in Winterville, between Winterville and Quimby. Generously was able to get 300 feet of beach by 200 feet deep, bordered on one side by St. Floyd Lake and on the other side by a railroad track. And we started cutting trees. And he might not have been making much money, but Benna was very frugal and was not afraid of labor and was not afraid to ask a lot of us to help. And so we would spend summer vacations from school. I was in college at this time. And we cut trees, we cleared an area. Dad worked on it. My uncle Leonil, my brother Leonil worked on it. When he'd come from the monastery, Leopold worked on it. Leopold had serious problems because he's allergic to all kinds of flies and mosquitoes and stuff. And when he would get stung, his whole face would swell. And this happened to him a number of times while working here. We had to take him away. It was that bad. But the whole family here participated. And so we kind of started having picnics here. And eventually, he primarily, but with my help, I guess, designed a log cabin. Then he found some farmer who had lots of trees. And they sold trees for lumber, but there was this area that had very straight 9-10 inch spruces, very tall. And after designing the camp, decided how many of these we would need because we wanted a log cabin. And so the trees were cut. They were delivered to our lot, which had been cleared, and let dry for 1 year. I was then the one hired, again, probably my sophomore or junior year in college, participated in the family project of peeling all of these trees. Peeled every single one of these trees. Then they were placed on a truck again and trucked to Fort Kent, Maine, a distance of 25, maybe even 30 miles from St. Croix, to a mill where Ben and I had friends. By that time he had moved parishes and he was in the area. And it's interesting how things are allowed to be done in those years that would never be allowed today. Banna's friend ran this mill, started the motors, ran the saws. He and I did the labor for free, sawed all these trees on 3 sides so they could be stacked, where the round side stays on the outside of the camp, which looks like a log. Inside is like a board, horizontal board. And Banna and I ran those trees to the mill, through the mill, with one other person, and then trucked them all back to this site, and we started building.
Okay, I'm going to hold right here. I'm going to change tape, Papa.